All right, welcome back to Bruise News. We don't break the news, we're just talking about the broken news. JD Oliva is here with me. We're going to talk about somebody who is going to be making a WWE debut in the very near future. They've invested a lot in him, and he just won the NCAA championships. Gable Steveson. JD, what is up?
What's up, man? Thanks for having me back on. Talk a little amateur wrestling. It's my thing, so I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, so I know the championships were last weekend. I saw lots of stuff about Gable and him leaving his shoes on the mat. Daniel Cormier was doing the commentary. So as far as Gable and his second back to back and his run, I from what I understand, it was a very impressive run for him.
I don't think it's incredibly impressive, right? I cannot remember the last time anyone medaled, let alone gold medaled in the Olympics in freestyle, and then came back and wrestled in college. Like it's probably been 30 years since that's happened. And what people aren't talking about enough,
Explain to people why that is hard and what the difference is.
freestyle freestyle and Greco-Roman are what's wrestled throughout the rest of the planet. In the US, we wrestle what we call collegiate or folk style wrestling. It's a different skill set based on a different series of rules. So most Americans these days do have a significant exposure to freestyle. It's a lot bigger at the youth and high school and junior levels than it used to be in this country. This is what I do in my spare time. I'm the Greco national coaching staff for the country, and so we do this. We try to get these athletes experience in the international styles. And Gable Steveson he's one of the guys that came along in this new wave of talent that's come in the last decade. In the 2000, from about 2000 to about 2012, we were really struggling on the freestyle scene internationally, really struggling, like one or two medals a year if we were lucky. Zeke Jones, who's now the head coach at Arizona State, changed that. He created this RTC system where all these colleges around the country have their own freestyle coaches. So every major college has its own dedicated freestyle coach, and it's made a humongous difference in the US in general. So this is what I was trying to say is Gable did the gold medal in the Olympics of the heavyweight division and came back to wrestle in college. And that hasn't happened, I don't think, since the 80s. Like in Greco, it's happened a couple times. Brandon Paulson in 96, Garrett Lowney in 2000. But in freestyle, which is a leg attack style, which is closer to the college style, it's unheard of. Like there's such a significant difference between an NCAA All-American or national champion and a senior level medalist. It's not even funny. For Gable to come back and do what he's done is unreal. And what most people have ignored is that heavyweight has five age group world champions, right? Like Colton Schultz, who Gable beat in the finals, was a Greco-Roman world champion. Tony Cassiope won the U23 world title. Who's from Iowa? He won the U23 title this past fall. Mason Paris from Michigan has been a U23 world champion, and so has Greg Kirkleet, who Gable beat in the semifinals from Penn State. This division is so deep, and Gable just absolutely owned it. And I don't know if people understand that any one of those four other guys in a different era would have walked through the NCAs, would have absolutely walked through it. And Gable is making them I don't want to make him look silly, but he's so significantly better than everyone else. It's scary.
So when it comes to like historical ranking, like it's kind of fun to compare. Obviously the athlete is different, the training is different, the access to nutrition and all these different things is much different in 2022 than it was in, say, the 80s. But like, you're a giant fan of this, and you go back through record books and stuff. Where do you see him fitting on the list of heavyweight wrestlers?
Internationally, I'd say it because he's stepping down. He's just a dude. He's not going to be Bruce Baumgartner, who medaled, I believe, in 4 Olympic games. That's a significant chunk of his life. But Gable was significantly better than Baumgartner in college, right? Bruce Baumgartner was a one-time NCAA champion. When the NCAA put their 75th anniversary team together in 2005, Kurt Angle and Carlton Helserig were the two heavyweight representatives. Angle was a 3-time national champion. Helserig was a 6-time national champion. He won 3 in Division 2, 3 in Division 1 back when that was legal. They're very different guys than what Gable is. Kurt Angle was a small heavyweight, about 220, very athletic, very much in the John Smith mold, where he was out there, really doing a lot of leg attacks, a lot of speed, which at that time in the 90s wasn't seen from heavyweights. And Carlton Helserig didn't wrestle in high school, right? He just would show up to the state tournament. He went to high school with no team, and he would murder everyone because he was a monster. And then he wound up playing in the NFL, great Carlton Helserig.
Pittsburgh Steelers.
Pittsburgh Steelers. So he's very, very different than these guys. Gable is probably the most skilled because the game has risen so high. If Angle was around today, he'd be phenomenal with this level of coach, because Gable is, I've heard people say Gable's a better athlete than Angle. I don't think that's true, but Gable's a really good athlete. They're different body types. Kurt Angle's about 215, 220.
Mm-hmm.
Gable's about 260. So they're very different. But those are probably the 4 best guys that you would compare him with. I mean, because he's doing something that's really common in the US is he's won his gold medal and then he's going to move on, which is pretty much the course that most athletes in the US have taken over the last 60 years. Like the US is very different than Russia or Japan or any of the former Soviet bloc countries, where guys just, this is what you do, right? Jordan Burroughs, who's been the US flag bearer for the last decade, is the exception to the rule, and he's changed things. Like, guys are sticking around more than one Olympic cycle nowadays. It looks like Gable's not going to do that, but he was just talking about maybe doing it again. So who knows what's going to happen.
So now let's transition to his WWE career. So do we know if he's been doing anything yet? Because I remember initially they said, oh, he's going to train for his season, and then he's also going to do some training for us. Like, I didn't know how that could happen, but have you heard anything about his current pro wrestling training?
I haven't. I haven't heard anything about that. But I imagine, Brad Reagans is right up there in Minneapolis. So I imagine maybe he's still, I don't know, maybe I'm just guessing. Like, I know that's what Brock did back in the day when he got tired of OVW. I know Brock has been in the room with Gable a few times to kind of work with him. So I imagine there's been some stuff done. His brother, I think, has debuted for NXT already.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I imagine there's some, but he's coming into this super, super raw, and it's not an enviable position, to be honest with you.
And I don't imagine he's going to take the NXT route, because they drafted him to Monday Night Raw, even though he wasn't a top pick for whatever reason. If he's not a top pick, I don't know why they drafted him. And so he's going to probably debut on the main roster. I don't know if I imagine he'll be at WrestleMania. We'll see him at WrestleMania. It would be pretty impactful if he kind of did something at WrestleMania, even if he's not ready. Obviously, there's an acumen that he needs to build up. But I've asked you this before, just about his personality, about the bigger than life that Vince McMahon wants from his guys. Have you changed your mindset on how successful maybe that he could be at this?
I think he could be as good as he wants to be at this. Like, he's really done a better job of showing up that personality lately. Like, early in his run at Minnesota, he was definitely a bit of a heel. People know what I'm talking about. And he would antagonize fans on Twitter. And then the last couple of years, he's really kind of turned a new leaf. Like, he's really come off very grateful. He comes off as a good dude, but he can talk some stuff. He's a phenomenal athlete. He really is. But then again, he's also 21 years old. Like, he's leaving college in a time when everyone gets an extra year because of the COVID. So he could have another year of wrestling if he wanted to. There were 3 guys wrestling last weekend that were 25 years old.
Wow.
There were 3 guys that become the first ever 5-time All-Americans in college. Like, he's so young. And when I say that, I mean, he's 21. Like, he just talked about maybe coming back for another Olympic run. If you follow him on Twitter, he'll flirt with the idea all the time of fighting in MMA. Like, he's talked about maybe playing for the Vikings. He sounds like a kid, which is kind of what he is. He's only 21 years old. I don't personally, he doesn't strike me as someone who really loves this, right? And which is fine, because that's where guys came from in the 60s and 70s, right? They all came from football. So there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, there's so many more options for guys now. I don't I don't know how this is going to work, to be honest with you.
Okay, so I saw there was another comment where he said he's also interested in MMA in the UFC. Now, he knows that he's signed with WWE, that's his first priority, but he mentioned doing a Brock Lesnar and possibly starting in wrestling, then crossing over to MMA. Now, that seems really hard in today's day and age, because when Brock did it, he was such an athletic marvel that he was able to use his strength and his speed to win some of those fights. I don't think anybody would ever say Brock Lesnar was a great mixed martial artist. So the level of mixed martial arts since Brock debuted has risen. And so Gable would be coming into a sport where, yeah, the great athlete piece of it maybe isn't as easy to utilize and overtake some of these more skilled guys these days.
The problem with being an Olympic gold medalist is people are looking to cash in on you immediately and put you into positions long before you're ready for them. I think that if Gable were to leave WWE, he would get a fight pretty big, pretty right
Yep.
much right out of the gate, way
Yep.
before he's ready for it. And I think that could expose him. I mean, we've seen a guy like Aaron Pico who was poised to become one of the best wrestlers in his weight class, who just left and decided he was going to do the MMA thing and was probably pushed way before Bellator, way before he was ready. And I'd hate to see that with Gable Steveson, but at the same time, I think that's what would happen. I do think if he wants to fight, I do think it's a mistake. I do think he should be fighting, because you can. It's easy. I think I'm not done either, so I can't say it's easier to go from one to the other. But it sure seems like you'd be in a better position to fight if you spent time learning how to fight now. So again, he really strikes me as a kid when he talks about these things. He wants to conquer the world, which is nothing wrong with that. That's what being 21 is all about. But I don't know if he really gets what this whole thing is going to be, especially the WWE in 2022 is a lot different than it was in 2005 or 6 whenever Brock left. So same with UFC. I mean, these are completely different worlds. So I don't know, man. I hope he's making the right calls, but it's going to be interesting.
So he's obviously got guys like Brock, like Paul Heyman, like Daniel Cormier, who he can turn to, who he could get advice from. What is the college coach's role in this? I imagine he's got a good relationship with his coach. He's been the ace guy forever. Like, does the coach is he passing him off to other guys to get this advice from, or is he at the same time kind of helping Gable manage through these waters? Like, what is the job of the coach there?
Brandon Eggum has been the guy at Minnesota for a long time. He was an assistant coach before Jay Robinson stepped down. So he's been in that system forever. Like I think Brandon Eggum and Brock were teammates back at the U in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. So the Stevensons moved to Minnesota. They're from Indiana. They moved to Minnesota to wrestle for Apple Valley, which at the time was the best school in Minnesota, so they could go to Minnesota. So and I think Dad wrestled for Minnesota too. So I mean, like, they've been part of this system forever, right? So Eggum is going to watch after his guy, but at the same time, I think he probably trusts Brock, right? They've known each other for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
So I think that they're comfortable handing him off. And there's, Chad Gable's is from just down the road in St. Michael, Albertville. So I mean, like, there's a lot of ties, from Minnesota and into the pro wrestling world, and there's a lot of good people that are associated with that Minnesota Golden Gopher program that are going to be looking out for Gable and trying to do what's right by him. But big money, and he seems to want the stardom and the fame. So I mean,
Right.
coach gets him ready. I mean, he's been under a spotlight. Gable came up in an era when high school kids had wrestling, and specifically has had more spotlight than they've ever had before. And college kids have more spotlight than they've ever had before. The NCAA just announced what their ratings were for the finals, and we beat NXT. So I mean, like, for amateur wrestling, that's real big. So I mean, and he's the star. He's been the star of the show. Him and the Penn State team, there were the two big narratives coming out. So he's been under a microscope forever. I think he's ready for it. I mean, they got him as ready as possible.
So you mentioned the ratings. They also were able to have a full house for the first time in a couple years, right?
Yeah, well, they usually do really well selling tickets and always
Yeah.
have. Like, it's always a tough ticket to get is NCAA tickets. Last year was the COVID thing, and it was weird. I didn't get to go because the COVID thing. And from what I was told by my friends, it was pretty cavernous in there. And this year it was back to normal. It was packed. The year Minnesota hosted it, it was going to be huge. I think it was going to be in the dome up there, whatever they're calling the dome up there now, and it would have been enormous. So we didn't quite get to that, but things are back to normal.
Okay, so last thing, Gable Steveson is not the only collegiate wrestler who's got charisma and who's a badass. Who else should be on WWE's radar, and maybe already is on WWE's radar and could follow him to the big world wrestling entertainment?
Well, the obvious answer is AJ Ferrari from Oklahoma State. That's the guy who signed. What I haven't heard enough people in our circles talking about is AJ had a horrific car accident
Yes.
earlier this year, and he's looking at the wreck. I'm amazed he walked away from it. I'm amazed he survived, quite frankly. It was very irresponsible driving. I'll just leave it at that. John Smith, his coach, the head coach of Oklahoma State, gave an interview just yesterday where they asked him how AJ was doing, and Coach Smith's a straight shooter, and he said, we're in a critical spot right now where AJ's the next couple months can be very important. So nobody's really heard much from him. AJ was kind of spouting off on Twitter because he wants that match with Max Dean from Penn State, who just won NCAAs, and that's going to be one of the matches to watch a year down the line. But I mean, physically, I don't know. I don't know where he's at right now. And there's not a lot of people talking a lot about it. I mean, it went from, oh yeah, he'll be okay, he'll be fine, to not a lot of people saying much. I mean, that's kind of their golden child wrestlers other than Gable, right? I think Joe Spivak from Northwestern, a football player, is someone who I think is going to have a tremendous amount of success with this whole thing. He's got a big personality. He's going to be very, very successful. The Kavner girls from Fresno, they're going to do really well. I'm very interested to see what they can come up with in the future with this next wave of guys. We don't have a lot of big brash personalities in amateur wrestling. There's not as many as there could be because for so many years, like not me, but I mean the culture has kind of coached it down, and that's been changing a lot. Like I would love to see a guy like a Tony Cassiope from Iowa get a look. I think he'd be good for that environment. Like there's a handful out there, but the sport right now is being dominated by Cale Sanderson and the Penn State guys, and they're so humble, and they talk about being grateful for everything, and they're not brash, they're not showboaty. It's gonna be interesting. Like AJ really sticks out in this group, and for his sake, I hope he's able to kind of pull himself back together.
Yeah, that's you mentioned Gable being sort of young and 21, and there's imagine being sort of on top of the world and being that young and thinking, rules don't really matter for me. So I very much, like you said, hope that he completes his recovery, because you've been mentioning him to me and to other folks as a possible person with a lot of charisma.
Yeah, he's the guy right now, other than Gable, and I don't know who else that would be other than those guys at the moment.
All right, so JD, you and Mike Gilbert do Brace for Impact on the Fight Game Media Network. You guys cover Impact Wrestling's television show from Thursday night. So you guys record pretty much after that show is done. And on the free feed, you get that review. And then on the Patreon, you guys do a little bit more. You add, 30 more minutes of content just covering the wrestling industry and other stuff that you guys find interesting to talk about. So anything, what's on the radar for tonight?
Well, tonight we're going to talk about Impact. I actually haven't gone over the card yet because I just got off work. So Mike and I really talk about the show, and we kind of have fun. Like we're not a super serious podcast. We poke fun at the show when it deserves to be poked fun at, and we praise it when it's really good. And it's been really good for the last 3-4 months. Impact is having a really good 2022, and it's been really fun to cover. They got a Mania show coming up, or Mania weekend show, I should say, coming up, the Multiverse of Matches, that cute title, but a lot of the like we were discussing it in our Brace for Impact Twitter direct message group, where none of these matches make sense to the direction of the company right now. So is this in storyline, in continuity, if you will? I don't know. I said I hope there's some answers, because I need I'm for being a big, jockish guy, like I kind of need a storyline to go along with my pro wrestling matches, or else.
Yo, you're a writer, man.
Yeah, I am a writer. That is my number one thing. Yes, but I mean, like I need a reason to watch pro wrestling. I need a storyline. If I want to go just watch athletes, I'll go watch amateur wrestling. It's
Yeah.
better matches there, quite
Yeah.
frankly. So I mean, like I want to see what's going on with the storyline, and I think that's kind of going to be what the show this week is going to be about, is what's going on with this Mania weekend show, and then
Right.
we'll cover the actual show and what happens this week.
All right. Thank you, JD, for jumping on here. Glad we were able to talk about Gable. And I don't know. I kind of have a feeling they're going to do something at WrestleMania. It's the biggest opportunity for him to make a good impact. So
Dave had a good idea about him doing something with Almost right away. I think that'd be a great way to debut him. I love that when I heard that. They need to run an angle with him, because you got to strike where the iron's hot with this guy. He is an NCAA champion and a gold medalist. He's had an unbelievable 6 months.
Yeah.
So you gotta, if you're gonna pay this guy the money, you got to do something with him right away.
All right. Thank you, JD. We are going to bring on our next guest here, and that is going to be Chris Samsa, the New Japan stats guy. We're going to talk about New Japan Cup, so let's bring Chris on right now. Chris, what is up?
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Back talking New Japan with my favorite man, Garrett. I'm stoked.
I love The Office. It looks like you're back recording music.
I'm up to stuff.
You getting the band back together?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's a real thing. We're basically the Blues Brothers, just getting the band back together. No, we're doing a little charity thing. So,
very cool.
Yeah, something came up, and an old fan reached out for a charitable event, and it's been really fun to get some guys back together playing music after 12 years or so. So That's my other side hustle, I guess. So I now have two. So because this may continue now, because it's been a lot of fun. So, but yeah, The Office is set up for not pro wrestling right now, but that's okay. All I really need for the pro wrestling is the computer. So
yeah. All right, so we're going to talk about some New Japan Cup. Now, I'm going to be honest, and you know this, but I didn't pick up the New Japan Cup until we got into the quarterfinals. I was like and actually last year was okay, but the previous couple years, like I was like so dedicated, and we were doing like March Madness brackets, and I was like, oh, let's do it. And then there's like all this wacky booking, and like weird stuff happens, and I'm like, it didn't feel that interesting to me. But how would you rate this year's cup? Because all the best guys were available, in the quarterfinals. Like I thought the quarterfinals matchups were awesome.
Yeah. So this year, probably for the first time ever, really, we've saw no upsets. I mean, very few upsets or things that you can consider upsets leading up to the quarterfinals. So all the heavy hitters were still in, right? So the quarterfinals were Zack Saver Jr. versus Will Ospreay, Shingo Takagi versus Hiromu Takahashi, Tetsuya Naito versus Jeff Cobb, and Kazuchika Okada versus Shima. And Shima is probably the most interesting name of that group, in the sense of who made it that far, or who is kind of involved in this kind of elite eight of New Japan. But normally you see some hype build for this tournament in the first couple of rounds because there's some sort of big upset.
Right.
And we didn't see that at all this year. It was very chalk headed into the quarters. And then once you're into the quarters, is anything really an upset at that point, right? I mean, I guess the only one that was possibly an upset, right? You've got Okada and Shima, or if Hiromu as a junior is going to go past Shingo. So that's why I think the quarterfinals looked so good, is because none of these guys got knocked out.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, if you haven't been paying attention, and I think you and I even talked about this a little bit in the group, like it's okay to just jump in at the quarters, because these are the guys you want to see. And then the shows are really palatable with just a couple of tournament matches to keep up on, or you wait until the round is over and you watch all four. So yeah, I mean, a really kind of exciting point to jump in. Now, certainly there were things worth watching prior. There's a lot of Bullet Club action in the first couple of rounds, where like that story is really starting to heat up. Maybe there's something that they can finally do with that. But really, when it came down to the matches, the wrestling quality is fantastic. That's New Japan's thing, right? But when it comes down to it, if you're jumping in, you still got a couple days if you want to go back to the
Yep.
quarters, right? And just watch those 4 matches. And honestly, Kevin Kelly and the gang, myself included, I guess, they do a great job of catching you up on how we got here. So, and that would be the case if you jump in this weekend too.
What was the best match of the first 2 rounds in your opinion?
I mean, Shingo and Ishii on March 7th was just like, it was one of the best versions of those 2 guys fighting, right? So if you're familiar with Shingo Takagi and Tomohiro Ishii, you can picture their matches, and you've probably seen one of their matches, but this was without a doubt one of the best versions of that match that could happen. And that was in the first round. And that was fabulous. And then besides that, I think running through the 2 big Hiromu matches, so Hiromu versus Minoru Suzuki was violent, to say the least, and Hiromu moved on, which is also an interesting kind of plot point.
Right.
And then you've got Hiromu versus Evil in the first Korakuen Hall crowd over 1,000 in over 2 years. So like they finally could do almost full capacity Korakuen Hall, and I wouldn't say the crowd ignored the cheering restrictions that are in place in Japan, but they were louder than you would expect from a Japanese pro wrestling crowd right now. So it was kind of it was a new version of a hot Korakuen. And Evil is the guy that I think has turned a lot of people off from New Japan in certain ways. But now we're getting into this cycle where everyone's really worried that Evil's going to win something and somebody cool knocks him out in almost every tournament, right? So I think it was Cobb in the G1 and now Hiromu in the New Japan Cup. So we are starting to see a little bit of the payoff of some of those frustrations, whether or not that's good or bad that we've gotten to this point. But I mean, someone's got to have some heat, right? So that was a fabulous match to watch. Really fun. Good to see Japan on the way to full cheering crowds too. Even though we're not quite there, but the confidence I think is there that that's how it's gonna be going forward very soon.
Now, I don't know if you've heard, but there is a little bit of a worry about another variant that, is related. It's an Omicron variant, and it could be even, crazier than the Omicron that we were dealing with. I can't imagine, like in Japan, like them just going like we do in the US, which is everything's fine, everything back to normal. Like my gym was so excited to take the mask mandate off, and I was like, I think I'm going to keep mine on for a little while. But Japan is so much more conservative when it comes to this. Like, I can't imagine them just going like, okay, we're going to open things back up, knowing that there are all these variants that have to be studied before you can really make that call.
Yeah. So, I mean, the unique thing about Japan is that people actually follow rules. A lot, at least. I don't think that's 100% true, obviously, but we've seen it in pro wrestling crowds and in other sports crowds. The rules are followed, the masks are on correctly, the whole shot, right?
Yeah.
So but I do know, what I know is that there's a ton of pressure on the Japanese government to allow entertainment to begin again. And I know that through pro wrestling, and I know that through the music industry. So the people that I know in the music industry are under the impression that by summer, people will be able to travel in and out freely, and they'll be able to have concerts and festivals and things of the sort. And I know a handful of people both on both sides of that equation that are already booked to go to Japan, that would not have been able to, say, 6 months ago. So I don't know what that means for like cheering though.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's the thing that I think affects the pro wrestling product more than anything. You could fill up these buildings with as many people as you want, but if they can't cheer, does it really feel like a full building? Right.
Right.
So that's what we're running into. I'm very curious to see what the attendance is like this weekend as they're in Osaka. In Osaka-jo Hall, even the most beautiful venue in pro wrestling. I think that it's going to be really interesting to see how many people they fill in, how they follow the rules, because Osaka has been a really good crowd for New Japan throughout this entire pandemic. It's been kind of the place that you feel most at home. So I'm hopeful. But there is a lot of confidence in the people that I know that we're headed in the right direction. That variant be damned, I think, but I think Japan would be the first country to step back, as opposed to power forward, like the US does, right?
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the quarterfinals matchups. I cannot be unbiased about Jeff Cobb.
Sure.
And so when I looked at what the possibilities in my head, I created this pathway for him to get to the finals and to beat Okada, because then that creates he's a contender now for that title, and then he could even lose in the finals. But that did not happen because Naito beat him, and so we're going to get Naito and Okada again after having that as the main event match of the last big show. What do you think about the way that they did that? And what was your expectation in the booking? Because when we did your brackets, I think you had a lot of Jeff Cobb to the finals people in there. I think I was one of them. So
yeah, Jeff was the favorite among pick'ems. So 32% of people picked Jeff Cobb, and that's I think almost twice the next highest, which I think was Shingo at 16%. So if I were going back in time and thinking, I didn't actually do a bracket because
you know too much.
I know too much. I apparently know too much. I didn't do a bracket, but if I saw all those Jeff Cobb brackets and they made sense, right? Mm-hmm. So Cobb could have had one of the best runs through this tournament and some wonderful wins. And even if he didn't win the tournament, then right, if he lost in the final or whatever it may be, he'd still have these big wins. And that seems to be where Cobb lives right now, in this like win a bunch of matches, have a great tournament, is a powerhouse, but doesn't quite finish the job just yet, right? I think he'll finish the job with a babyface turn at some point. And I think that's the long game for Cobb. But they could also just heat him up as a big bruiser and put him in any situation like they did with Okada all last year. So, but that didn't happen, right? We saw Naito go through, and I don't know if anyone thought Naito was going to go this far, but now that I look at it, it makes sense because he didn't get a G1 run because he was eliminated and then injured. He was injured, which then eliminated him with a bunch of forfeits. So maybe we should have seen this coming, except I didn't see them doing another Okada Naito match in the semifinals of the New Japan Cup. Like, that match seems so big.
Right.
And to bounce it back so quickly. But I think there's something, I don't know that Naito was supposed to be the guy in February. I think that was penciled for Ibushi, and Ibushi's just clearly not physically ready yet. So
have you heard anything latest on him?
So no, I know that he's training. So that's as far as I know. So he's to the point where I guess he's working on his conditioning. But that dude had a year last year, so he's gonna have to work himself back, because I think he was still working himself back from being ill during the G1. So, and I don't know that we ever got to full strength. So he's got a lot to work himself back to, but he's also got to come back at a big spot because he's a big guy.
Yeah.
So, and that does kind of play into the final four here, because you've got Okada, Naito, Zack Sabre Jr., Shingo. Any of those guys could win, but what happens if Okada wins?
Yeah.
Right? Because this whole thing is supposed to set up a title challenger.
Then he calls a shot, right?
You would think. That nobody ever really says that, but everyone always assumes it. So, yeah. So then Okada calls a shot, and if it's Ibushi, right? Oh, the crowd goes wild, right? Like, that's, I mean, that's really what would happen, because Ibushi would then come out and hopefully then have a great match and show that he's totally ready. So that's my bet if Okada wins. But I think the final that we're going to get, if you want me to go there.
Yeah.
I think the final that we're going to get, and this just clicked with me while you and JD were talking. I was just like kind of scratching out some notes. The final we're going to get is Zack Sabre Jr. versus Naito, because Zack Sabre Jr. injured Naito in the first match of the G1 in Osaka, which is now where this weekend is, where the finals are. They're in Osaka Hall. So in the perfect world of New Japan Classic booking, that's the match. And Naito gets his win back over Okada, but doesn't have to take the belt off of him.
So can we talk about Zack Saber Jr. and Will Ospreay? You know, we watch so much wrestling, and I don't write anything down, and I just watch a match and I go, oh, that was a great match. Oh, that was a great match. Oh, that was a great match.
Yeah.
And so, like, because we have so many great matches these days, they just kind of all blur together. And so I can watch that and go, wow, this is one of my favorite matches this year, though I've probably said that 10 times already, and it's only March, right? So what did you think about the match, and then also the finish where Ospreay taps, the referee quickly ends the match, and for the next 10 minutes, Ospreay and Jeff Cobb are saying that he didn't tap as a way to get Zack to the semifinals.
So, I mean, you could put Zack Sabre Jr. and Will Ospreay in the ring together as many times as you want, and they're going to figure out some creative way to get to where they need to go. And because those guys are two of the best in the industry, and I think that they play off each other because they are different. They're very, very different wrestlers, but I think they have this immense respect for each other and the things that they cannot do themselves that the other person can do. And, you know, that match on paper will always be one of the best matches of this generation, no matter where you put it. And it's going to end up on that particular match is going to end up on people's top 10 lists from the quarterfinals of the New Japan Cup in a small building, you know, like not any big, huge main event, you know, of the Tokyo Dome or Osaka Joe Hall or whatever. Right. Like, but that's, you know, those guys can blow up York Hall for Rev Pro and people will pay attention to it. So as for the finish, right? So the finish I think a little bit played off of the Sonata finish where I'm not going to blame anybody, right? Sonata got injured during the match. He broke his orbital bone and was maybe knocked out. No one's really sure. And then, you know, they had to run a referee stoppage. So with Red Shoes, right? Red Shoes then is the referee of the Zack Sabre Jr. Will Ospreay match, and Red Shoes took forever to do the referee stoppage because I think it was off script, right? So we didn't know where we were going, and it was really awkward. And then now Red Shoes is in the ring, and he calls Will tapping really quickly. Yeah. So I don't know. Are we going to like a Hebner, you know, whatever thing going on? I don't know. Or is this a big callback? Is this some more Western influence into our precious New Japan? I mean, maybe, but it worked, right? So I like that Will tapped one way or another. I like that it was a submission, that they didn't have to like work in some funky pin, because tapping in New Japan is still a big deal. If you being a submission artist like Zack Sabre Jr., the person with the most submissions in New Japan Cup history, if you're him, like, to win, that's how you win. So he doesn't really have an impact finisher. So you got to tap, but with someone like Will, who clearly is protected in the booking, you got to make something out of it. So they've made something out of it, and we'll see where that goes. Maybe another great Zack Sabre Jr. Will Ospreay match.
All right. So Jeremy Finestone wanted me to mention his prediction. So here's his prediction. Zack Sabre Jr. wins the cup, challenges Okada, loses in a brilliant match, and then he comes to the States for a tour either before or after the G1. Could we see Zack Sabre Jr. in AEW or New Japan Strong and come over here for a little while?
I would love it. I think we know that there's someone in AEW that really wants to wrestle Zack Sabre Jr.
Yes.
Brian Danielson, right?
Yes.
So that, and there's a great new group in AEW that I think Zack could fit in pretty well with, right?
Yes.
Let's not forget that in early 2020, Zack was about to fight Jon Moxley. So is that an avenue to get there? Maybe, right? Like, I'm sure that's a match that they want to run back too. But yeah, so Zack was holding on to the US championship, like while Moxley was knocked out after the Suzuki match and all that. So there was something in the works there when Moxley called Zack a human udon noodle, and you know, another great Moxley line, right? So Zack is a guy that I think should come to the States. Like his pal Minor Suzuki, he could just have a great run through the indies and a couple of hot shots on either Impact or AEW and run a big angle. And maybe that'll carry over. Maybe finally we'll see something carry over into Japan. Because I know that those two guys, Moxley and Danielson, are both on the radar for another trip to Japan.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Zack's huge in the States, right? People love his promos. They love his style. Obviously, he's got matchups galore that could happen here. So I think he's definitely a candidate to make his way over to the US and do something interesting. So yeah, I would love to see that. But I think Jeremy's probably maybe in line with what's going to happen in regards to at least the tournament. If I had to bet, maybe if he's facing Okada, I don't think he's going to face Okada in the final, but he would. I don't know that Zack's ready for the big belt yet, and but they also put the belt on Shingo last year, so like maybe that's all out the window with this new belt, right? Where these guys can actually, some of these guys that are kind of outsiders, quote unquote outsiders, they can actually win. So I think that's helpful.
Justin Nipper, this for the podcast, the audio podcast listeners. Justin Nipper said Zack is in Suzuki-gun, and Brian had the bout with Suzuki last year. Mox has history with him too. Blackpool Combat Club, Suzuki-gun connection, rivalry. So yeah, lots of creative stuff that you could do with those two companies. Okay, so are you going to go to the Moxley Ospreay match?
I will be in attendance in Chicago, of course. Yes,
that's gonna be
that's gonna be fun. I was so surprised that they're actually going with that match. I think I said that in the group too, like, because that show was sold out before they announced that match, and that match is huge.
Yeah,
I mean, that match that's a big time matchup. So I mean, Chicago's the right city to run it in. I have no bias there at all, but I mean, we're gonna have a good time that night. It's gonna be a good show.
All right, last things here, which is for the people who want to catch the semis and the finals. As far as US viewers, what times are we looking at here?
Okay. we didn't
prep you for that.
Yeah, you didn't prep me for this. I can let's see. Okay, so we're at 4 p.m. Japan time, which is 2 a.m. Central for Saturday night.
So that's 11
Friday night. So Saturday morning, really. Which would be midnight Pacific.
Okay.
Is that how that works? Yeah.
Wait. Or 11?
2 hours.
Okay. Midnight. Okay.
Yeah. So mid-4. Yeah.
Now, is this Friday night turning into Saturday morning, or is this Saturday night? Okay.
Friday night turning into Saturday morning, 4 p.m. Japan time, which is 2 p.m. Chicago time, 2 a.m. Chicago time, which is midnight your time. Okay. The next night, the finals, Saturday night into Sunday morning is 2 p.m. Japan Standard Time, which would be midnight Central.
So earlier for
and
us.
10 p.m. on your coast or out there. Yeah, so not bad start times. I got a thing Saturday night, so I'm probably just staying up and I'm just gonna watch it. I might not even be home by then, to be honest. So for the beginning of it, midnight, I don't know. It's a rock show.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But yeah, so easy start times. When it comes down to it, these are the shows to tap into too. Like I said, Osaka Joe Hall is one of the most beautiful pro wrestling venues on the planet, and 2 nights there with some really killer matchups. I mean, Zack Saver Jr. versus Shingo. Like, let's not write off Shingo either. Like, these are going to be really, really fun matches. And then, honestly, the undercard will get you caught up on what else is going on.
All right. Thank you for jumping on and catching us all up. So you are at the Chris Samsa on Twitter. Is there anything else you want to mention to the folks?
Just sportofprowrestling.com for anything I'm up to. But yeah, Twitter's a good spot too. So thanks for having me.
Chris, it was awesome. Always love talking to you. I always say this, but we don't do it enough. And I'm sure we'll talk again come G1 time, and just a bunch of cool stuff happening. Like, I think a lot of people kind of turned away from New Japan a little bit over the last year, but I'm not one of them. I still followed. I maybe didn't watch as much, but I think it's turning again, and there's some really good stuff happening.
Yeah, I think we're on the path to a big comeback from New Japan, and I think that having the traditional calendar in place will be helpful too.
Yeah,
because That big gap in the summer for the G1, kind of between AEW's big shows, I think is going to be really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, thanks again. And check Chris out at the Chris Samsa on Twitter. All right, last guest here. He's usually my co-host, but we're saving him for the end. He is Paul Fontaine. Paul, how are you? Oh, I think you're muted, Paul.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm all right. I'm all right. I'm doing okay.
So let's talk a little bit about this Colby and Jorge Masvidal story.
Yeah, from the sublime to the ridiculous.
So, if we are to believe Colby's police report, Masvidal basically sucker punched him. Is that what we are to believe?
Yeah, I mean, you can say that, and I guess technically it's true. I mean, he's not without fault, as most people know. Colby egged him on. Colby's walking around with a King of Miami belt. He's living the gimmick. And Masvidal told him, I mean, I think everybody knows, in an MMA fight, Colby Covington's going to win because he's got more skills for an MMA fight. But
100%.
in an actual street fight, and if you with street fighting rules, Jorge might kill him, like legitimately. So, this is what happened.
You know how Moxley describes what when I talk to him about the Covington fight, he uses a term which I will not say completely.
Wrestle
F. Yeah. Colby's just going to wrestle F him.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, which is what he did, but street fight's much different. So, when I was thinking about, like, what are some of the biggest street fights in boxing and MMA? Because the one that I originally thought about was Mike Tyson and Mitch Blood Green.
Mm-hmm.
So as the story goes, Mike Tyson and Mitch Green fought, I think, in 1986. In 1988, Mitch Green saw Tyson in New York somewhere, and he went up to Tyson and said, "Look, Don King still owes me money." And it ended up having a fight. And Tyson shuts Green's left eye, opens up a cut. So they actually got in a physical fight. Tyson was the heavyweight champion of the world at this point. His next fight, which was going to be against Frank Bruno, had to be pushed back because he messed up his hand. So, like, when you think of something like this, it is a fighting sport.
Mm-hmm.
These guys do not like each other, so the beef was real. And then when it's worked up and it becomes a shoot fight, even in the streets, this happens. But it's like, I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, Masvidal's so stupid. Masvidal's so stupid." And I'm like, yes, in the court of law, he's very dumb for doing this, but his job is to punch this guy in the face, and he didn't get the job done. So he's very mad that he didn't get the job done. And this guy's testing his man. And so it doesn't surprise me that I'm actually more surprised that this stuff doesn't happen more in the public. Like, and I also feel like if this was Nick or Nate Diaz, they'd sort of go, that's just the Diaz brothers being the Diaz brothers. But people seem to be pretty frustrated with Masvidal here, even knowing that Colby Covington is the real heel in this situation.
Well, the big one, and maybe more relevant to what we're talking about than the Mike Tyson one, was Lee Murray and Tito Ortiz, which was ended up, they had a street fight, and according to Matt Hughes, Lee Murray knocked him out. But and then they had a fight, and then Tito won the fight because Tito's a much better MMA fighter, quote unquote, practitioner, than a street fighter, and Lee Murray is just a bad dude. So this is what happens, and you're right, it's amazing that it doesn't happen more often. And really, like, Colby, I don't want to say somebody deserves to get punched in the face, but Colby was asking for it. I mean, there's a line you don't cross, and he was crossing it with talking about people's kids, and you know, and some of the stuff he was, you know, Street Jesus and all this stuff, like, you know, if Jorge had no repercussions at all, like, he probably would have done a lot worse. And as it is, you know, I guess I thought originally I thought I saw reports saying he got charged, but I don't think he actually did get
I
charged.
saw him. He was handcuffed, and he was.
Yeah, he was brought in, but I think they released him without charges.
Oh, okay.
So,
Got it.
I could be wrong about that, and if anybody watching wants to correct me, they can. But yeah, so this was coming, and you know, and I think they both said, especially Jorge, like, this ain't over. You know, like, you know, even though you beat me, like, you know, we're gonna meet someday, and it may not be in an octagon. And here we are.
Oof.
And if it leads to a rematch, you know, it's easy money for Colby, and
Yeah.
you know, I'm sure Jorge has a puncher's chance. So you never know. There's not a ton interesting out there for either one of them right now, actually.
Yeah, and you know what? What's unfortunate, and this is just part of the game. This is part of the business of prize fighting, which is a lot of times when you're at your peak, how good of a fighter you are doesn't match your popularity yet. And it's not until later where, for poor Masvidal, he's late in his career or later in his career, and now he's matched up against guys who are not great matchups for him. And his popularity is the highest it's ever been, but his fighting skill is not up to maybe what it would have been.
Well, at least, you know, he got the Masvidal, or he got the Askren knockout, you know,
Yes.
kind of probably at the peak of his ability as a fighter, you know, so, you know, and he cashed in, and you know, and he's still cashing in, and he's not quite into Chuck Liddell territory yet, but he's closer to that than he is to GSP, put it that way.
So what is up with the UFC show this weekend? Is there what interest is there for you on this show?
Well, so the main event is it's basically almost very similar to last week in that it's two, you know, highly ranked heavyweights going against each other. It's Curtis Blades and Chris Daukaus. Now, Chris Daukaus is a guy that
you pegged Daukaus as a future guy.
I did at the end of 2020, and by the end of 2021, he was main eventing against Derek Lewis, and this will be his second straight main event. And Curtis Blades is a guy that, you know, after his last fight, everybody thought he was going to leave the UFC because his contract was over, and he's one of those guys that is tough to book because he's going to beat everybody but the top guys. And the problem is, you know, all he's doing is killing contenders when you put him in fights. So he was a guy that was a prime candidate that UFC wouldn't renew his contract, but there wasn't really a lot of interest out there from the other promotions. Bellator isn't really spending money right now. PFL's high price free agents didn't really work out last season. So they re-signed Blades, and they've got him in here in a main event against another rising contender. And Blades, you know, he's lost twice to Francis Ngannou, and he lost to Derek Lewis, but he was knocked out in the second round in a fight that he was winning.
Yeah.
So, you know, like, this is where he is. So he could knock out Chris Daukaus. He's also an outstanding wrestler, but Daukaus is an outstanding wrestler as well. So I think this is a really interesting fight. And if Daukaus wins, he completely rebounds from the Derek Lewis loss. But if he loses, he's done as a contender. So it's got a lot of stakes. And it's an ESPN show. The whole card's on ESPN, and there's a lot of big names on the show. Matt Brown, probably the biggest name to casual fans. He's fighting Brian Barberina. We got Kai Kara France, who I know you like, flyweight. Neil Magny, Neil Magny, Max Griffin is on the prelims. That's a big welterweight fight. Sarah McMahon, former Olympian. JD's probably a big fan of.
She's still in the mix.
She is, at bantamweight. Jennifer Maia, former title challenger. So you know, there's a lot of big names on the card. Co-main event is Joanne Wood, the former Joanne Calderwood, against Alexa Grasso, who probably will get a title shot if she wins this. So, you know, a lot of stakes, a lot of big names. Like, again, like probably every card, if you watch, you know, half dozen to a dozen UFC shows a year, you probably recognize a name in just about every one of these fights. So it's a good show.
Is it going to be at a real building, or is it back at the Apex?
No. They're in Columbus. So this is the second week in a row that Fight Night is on the road, and they're at the Nationwide Arena in Columbus. And last we heard there was about 200 tickets left, so it's going to sell out. Amazing. They have not had an unsold ticket since they came back, you know, from the pandemic. So then next week is a pay-per-view from Jacksonville, and then they're back in the Apex until June. And then I think like it looks like maybe they're going to go on the road starting in July, but you know, they make a lot of money going out of the Apex, like, but those shows, like,
Yeah.
they're so bad to watch at this point now, especially now that we see like that London crowd last week was so great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we gushed about that on In the Clinch this week. Patty the Batty and Molly the Meatball.
So did you hear my conversation with JD about Gable Steveson?
I heard the first part of it.
So that Gable Steveson talked about possibly doing the Brock Lesnar route, starting in wrestling, and then maybe trying to do the UFC after, doing the pro wrestling thing. And I was talking to JD about, when Brock did it, the heavyweight division, there were some good fighters, but I don't think the skill level as far as overall MMA fighters, mixed martial artists, is even close to what it is now. And I was saying how I think it'd be much harder for Gable Steveson to kind of dump in, even at the as great of an athlete as he is. We saw Greg Hardy try and do it, and he did okay, but a lot of setups. What do you think about someone like Steveson? Going like, I'll do the pro wrestling thing, and then maybe we'll try some MMA. It just seems like it. Even as young as he is, it seems like it would be so much harder to do these days.
So preface this by saying I didn't hear what JD had to say about that, but my thoughts are he'd be better off going the other way around, going into MMA first, and then doing the pro wrestling, because I think that the skills in amateur wrestling better translate to MMA than they do to pro wrestling. Pro wrestling is a completely different game, even though it's wrestling. Like, I think amateur wrestling is more similar to UFC than amateur wrestling is to pro wrestling. So if he conquers pro wrestling, he's basically going to be learning how not to hurt people. So it's almost untraining you for UFC. So for Brock to do what he did, like you said, there's no way he would do that now. He'd be a draw. Yeah. But, it's like CM Punk. Like, if you can't fight, you can't fight. I think obviously he's going to do better than CM Punk, but he's probably not going to be winning a world title. But if he came in now, and they built him up properly, put him on some of these regional shows, and then, like a Greg Hardy, put him on that path. Yeah. I think he's got more natural skills for MMA than Greg Hardy did. Yeah. It's a matter of whether or not he can punch, and we don't know that. Like, he hasn't done any of that. So, and we saw Aaron Pico. That's probably a better comparison. And Pico that
was the one that JD also made.
And he's pretty successful, but I mean, they did a terrible job with matchmaking with him. Yeah. So I mean, he's recovered and he's doing okay now, but he had a couple losses. Like, he lost to Adam Borix, and Borix is like one of the top 15 featherweights in the world. They never should have matched him up with that guy. Yeah. So that early in his career, he could probably fight him now. But yeah, so I'd think I'd feel better about it if he went into UFC first. So I think if he could make good money if he clicks into pro wrestling, he'll be set for life. He doesn't need to ever get hit in the face for real, unless he wants to.
All right, let's quickly switch gears. You were on your own road to WrestleMania, back to seeing live wrestling. So have you figured out which shows you're actually going to attend?
Well, I'm hoping, like, again, it's gonna, when you say a road to WrestleMania, it's a very literal road. And if you Google Winnipeg to Dallas, you see it on the map. It's a straight shot south. So we are leaving on Wednesday morning, God willing. There's people that listen to Patreon will know there's a chance we may not go, but I'm still hoping at this point. But we leave Wednesday morning. So my goal is to get to Omaha by Wednesday night, stay in Omaha or around there, maybe pop into Stevie J's place. He can throw on the grill. And then on the way, and then the second night, get to Dallas. So if we can get to Dallas Thursday night, that leaves Friday free all day. And then I'll try to I want to get to the Ring of Honor show, and I want to get to the Multiverse show.
Aren't those show at the exact same time though?
No, I think they're like 2 hours apart.
Okay.
So I don't need to see the whole show. The other one I would not mind seeing, but I think it's like at midnight or something. The New Japan show.
I like Dave and Brian were talking this morning.
Yeah.
And it sounded like all three of those shows were at very similar times.
Because I mean, Filthy Tom is wrestling on the Strong show. So I said, I want to go to that. And my daughter has a Filthy Tom shirt, so I'd kind of like to get a picture of them together.
That'd be nice.
I think that'll happen at some point on the weekend anyways. And then I'm definitely, I think, going to go to the NXT show on Saturday morning. I'm trying to get comped for that. But if not, I'll pay for the tickets, and that'll just be me. Like, I'll just be going by myself.
Yeah.
And then my whole family's going to Mania for both nights. So
awesome.
That'll be fun. And, you know, if the daughter doesn't do very well in a crowd, her favorite is wrestling on the first night. So we'll, then they can sit out the second show.
Yeah.
Or sit out, like they won't mind staying in the hotel room while I go to the show if that's the case. But I'm actually super excited for the show. Like, I mean,
you've been waiting.
Yeah, well, compared to, compared to like AEW or, pretty much any promotion on the planet, like their build is terrible. But compared to like their normal build for a pay-per-view, like this is off the charts. Like I
kind of agree.
Yeah.
I was talking to Andrew on We're Live Pal, and I was saying, when the match was announced until now, do you feel better about the match? Do you feel worse?
You're talking about Lesnar Reigns?
So all the top matches,
okay.
And I think the only one that I thought maybe maybe I was more excited for when it was announced is the Ronda match. Like, I think they're killing us over the head with them just fighting every week.
Okay.
But all of the other matches, I think at least the top ones, like Reigns and Lesnar, has been awesome. It's fun seeing Brock Lesnar as a babyface. Even Bianca and Becky, they're not quite at the Ronda Charlotte level, but they've been mixing it up a lot. I still think that I feel like that's going to be like the match, the sleeper match of the weekend. I feel like they're just going to bust it in that match because they're kind of overshadowed a little bit, and I
think they want to prove that they should have been the main event.
Yeah, I think there's some good stuff there, and then the Austin thing, like that's the big wild card, right? Like, what are we going to get? And
the Austin thing is on Saturday, right?
Yes.
So I guess there's a chance that could end up being both nights, and I think that's what some people are thinking. Like they have a confrontation the first night and then an actual match. So I've really been into the Ronda Charlotte thing because I think especially the last couple weeks, like Ronda's getting beat up and you can see it in her face, like she wants to kill Charlotte. So I think like she came out as smiley happy Ronda for a while. And now she's back to being mean, but she's not mad at the fans. She's mad at Charlotte. So I'm kind of really digging that, but I know I'm in the minority. Honestly, like when I think about all the matches, the big ones anyways, like I can't think of any match. Like the women's tag has been terrible. Like, that setup, but I'm into the men's tag. I'm assuming it's going to be a 3-way. They haven't officially announced that yet. Finn Balor and Damian Priest. Yeah. But pretty much everything else I'm kind of really into, and I think they've done a good job with. Balor Priest has been lazy, but that's whatever. You can't promote every single match.
All right. So just last night, you and Jeff Hawkins put up the Dynamite show. It seems like he liked the show a little bit more than you did. I really loved his comment about, because Jeff does stand up and he's done improv stuff. So when he talks about Wheeler Yuta, and like, I almost feel like they should just hire Jeff and help him help these guys out backstage. But so I mentioned this on the Fight Game podcast, but so obviously Tony has Wheeler, he's got Lee Moriarty, he's got Daniel Garcia, and these are kind of younger guys who are not overexposed. They're losing a lot, but I was like, all those guys are great. They're young. We also have a guy like Jay Lethal who ticks every single box that they possibly want, and he should not be at the same level as these guys. He should be higher than these guys. So he's got some balancing acts to do. But I was watching that show going like, man, Jay Lethal is everything he wants these other guys to be, and yet we never see Jay Lethal on TV.
No, and then there's other guys like, Jonathan Grisham, I assume, is going to come in at some point. He'd be perfect for that Danielson Moxley group, I think. Josh Woods has been killing it on Dark, and he's another one that's like the style is just right there. Like if you like Filthy Tom, like that's basically they're almost the same guy except Woods is younger. Like he
wears booty shorts too.
No, but I mean, just the wrestling style. But I think he wears shorts. Like he's a little underdressed. But yeah, like we had that discussion actually to kick off the show last night. Like for after I did my little personal thing, we did like 10 minutes on kind of carrying on the conversation that Kevin Ely and James McDaniel had on the Boom on the weekend about too many top guys. Because they got all these guys, even like a Keith Lee and a Swerve Scott. Like they almost seem lost in the shuffle already, and Swerve Scott's kind of like the Rampage guy. It's like,
I think he's going to get me to watch Rampage though, which I have not watched.
Which is, I'm sure the intent, right? And I'm really looking forward to that match too. But I mean, he went from one show where it gets watched by 600,000 people to another show that's watched by 600,000 people. So it's kind of a sideways step, but he is getting featured, he's getting promo segments on Dynamite. And I do think Tony's got big plans for him.
Yeah.
And hopefully Keith Lee too, because I really like both those dudes.
All right, so yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on you all of next week.
I'll keep you guys updated.
We're gonna have so much content for WrestleMania weekend next week on the Patreon and the Fight Game Media Free Network, on the website, on the YouTube channel. We're blowing it up big time. So Paul, if he's going to be there, we may get him to call in. We'll see.
I'll have my stories. I'll have my stuff. I can even do a little video.
Yeah, and so we'll figure it out. But yeah, big stuff, and happy that you're going to get to go, because I know you've been sort of envious of the last shows that we've been able to do, and also 100% best wishes, hopes, prayers, everything.
So I just got an update.
Your wife.
I literally just got an update. Came in 2 minutes ago. They want to keep her till Monday, maybe Tuesday, but they think she can do the trip. She might be a little woozy from the meds, but she can do the trip. So that's cool. So it's looking good.
You married a tough person. Jesus.
I married up. I'll just say that. Like, I way up. So I'm lucky.
All right.
I'm lucky.
All right. Don't cut yourself short either, though. You're a really terrific human being. Okay. Thanks to JD. Thanks to Chris Samsa. Thanks to my normal co-host here, Paul. I'm Double G. We will see you when we see you. Peace out.